Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining us. This is the 9th Equity Talk Roundtable, and we're really excited to be talking about sustainability today. My name is Neha Kumar, VP at Large, also an Associate Professor, Georgia Jack. And I've been here for each one of the Equity Talks so far, and it's been great. Just so you know, we're going to have 60 minutes of recorded time and then 30 minutes of unrecorded time after. And everything that we talk about is going to be blocked eventually. And so you will have a video recording and a blog post and Miriam's amazing sketch notes to take a look at after we are done. And I will now hand it over to our organizers for this session to introduce themselves quickly. So first, Chris, you're first on my screen, so why don't you go ahead?
Hi there, I'm Chris Clark. I'm a lecturer or assistant prof at the University of Bath, and for the past 2 years, I have been the WIS Sustainability Co-Chair. I'll hand it, so Jason's next on mine.
Hi, my name's Jason Jacks. I am a research associate at the University of Cambridge, and my research has been on the sustainability of conferences, in particular the CO2 emissions from travel to and from those conferences. So I'll pass it over to Bridget now.
Hi, I'm Bridget Kane. I work at Karlstad University in Sweden as an associate professor. And this year I'm Sustainability Chair for CSCW. And last year, along with Kristen, we were Sustainability Chairs for CSCW and WIST with Chris too.
Shall I go next?
Well, Kelly. Okay, so
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Kelly Widdicks from Lancaster University. I have been doing some research for the last how many years in sustainable human-computer interaction, and this year I'm one of the WIS Sustainability Chairs, which is kind of why I got involved in all of this. So yeah, Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Williams. I'm a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University. And I've had the lovely pleasure of working with Chris and Bridget as sustainability co-chairs for WIST and CSCW, as well as working with Alex Ion and Nicholas Chen for WIST in 2019. And I will be sustainability chair in CHI 2022. So I've been immersed in these kinds of questions, and I'd love to hear what everyone's thoughts are.
I think it goes back to you, Cale.
Brilliant. Yeah, so I'm Cale Passmore, pronouns they, them, he, him, coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, which is homeland to the Métis, Nakota, Dakota, Dene, Soto, Cree, and it's been heavy here lately amongst all the, issues with colonialism and mass graves and things coming up. But that's part of why we're here, is for purposes of equity and realizing research doesn't exist in a void. In particular, we're here today to discuss sustainability. I'm going to run through the code of conduct incredibly quickly. It's available in full at a link that's going to be posted to the chat any second now. And while I do, introduce yourself in the chat, say hi, let people know what brought you here. As with any time when you offer to speak, we ask you state your name, affiliation, and pronouns. You can add pronouns to your username by right-clicking the box, which contains your face, in the Zoom window and selecting rename. This is encouraged, but only do so if you feel comfortable. And we've set this space up as a roundtable, meaning anyone's free to offer critiques, solutions, or just share your experiences at any time. We're here to discuss issues, solutions, and experiences around sustainability in SIGCHI and our ecological relationships. By attending the roundtable in this time, your consent is ongoing. Any participation, questions, comments, what you post in the chat will be recorded. After the first hour together, we'll proceed with another half hour of unrecorded time for those who wish to raise issues without existing on the internet until the end of digital time. And yeah, for the same reasons of privacy and consent, we ask you not to share content from the talk on social media. We'll post this in full with additional accessibility options afterward. And if you're posting after the event, hashtag SIGCHI and hashtag Equity Talk will be your hashtags. We have captioning. Thank you, Susie. Our interpreter, oh, I can't see your full name. Shonda? Perfect. And our magician with a pen, Miriam, sketchnoting the entire event. We have Slido, which will be linked in the chat for posting and upvoting questions to help us democratically organize things. We're striving for an equitable dialogue here. And so we do have to balance comments from the speakers, from the chat and from Slido. Whatever we don't have time to get around to, we will address in the Discord, which will be running and is asynchronously going all the time, as well as the blog post afterward. If there are any issues, any experiences of harassment, discomfort, any need for additional accessibility options, just message me or Neha. And yeah, we encourage constructive criticism in this space. That does not include criticism of personal experiences, which are never up for debate here. And yeah, our purpose is to just draw awareness to the incredibly complicated interactions between individual experiences, collective expressions, and systemic policies within SIGCHI around environmental sustainability. Some of these experiences are sources of frustration and depression for many. So I just want to say that that frustration is valid. And I'd like to remind everyone here that we're a diverse group of humans across pretty much every demographic. So be patient, show sensitivity to whomever has the floor, keep aware of the time and space that you're taking up, be kind, be supportive, be critical, but be constructively so. Just know not everyone arrives with the same education level, culture, or access when it comes to issues of social identity, social justice. And if an identifying word or phrase comes up that just doesn't feel right or is incorrect, take a quick moment, correct it, and refocus us on the chat at hand. Raise your hand when you'd like to speak. And if I don't see you because I'm being a huge scatterbrain, just nudge me with a message. And yeah, finally, I guess I'd like to just remind those that may have a more difficult time offering their experiences due to language, time zone, confidence, age, experience, or other barriers, your voice is especially welcomed here. So with all of that done and the house kept, our guiding question today is, at what point does the role of a sustainability expert become relevant when planning a SIGCHI conference, whether it's a big conference like CHI or a smaller one like CSCW? And I'm seeing already the top voted Slido question that we can begin to address is, what can we do to minimize the footprint of the SIGCHI community when physical conferences return? So anyone that would like to just start us off is more than welcome here.
Sustainability chairs are always relevant, no matter the size of the conference. This should always be a consideration.
It's pretty hard to do much of anything without the earth.
Okay, while everyone's thinking, why don't I just start some things off with just saying, what have we tried in the past couple of years? So I think one we've tried to do is just understand how big is our footprint. We've tried to collect data from travel to the conferences, but also understanding energy usage at the conference. How does our diet or our meal planning impact our footprint? How does reusable materials versus disposable materials impact our footprint? And how easy is it to do that at scale? So those are some questions we've been thinking about. And as we've tried to sort of measure and understand what are the trade-offs, we've come into real sticky issues of what gets measured, how does it get measured, and how valid are those measurements, and how do we take that data and move forward?
Thank you, Kristen. That's actually really helpful. Just on that, I wonder if anyone would like to speak to maybe what some of the most overlooked aspects of this are. And Andy, if you'd like to offer some of your insight, that would be fantastic.
I wasn't going to ask about the overlooked items. I just thought, you know, what are the big ticket items in the data you've collected so far? Because we can get down into fine detail, and we're academics, so we love detail, and that's great. But you know, where are the big wins?
Right now, we don't have an answer for that. So I would say, you know, we started at least at WIST in 2019 to try to get some kind of baseline. And then, you know, pandemic happened. So then we also tried to get some data during the virtual conferences. But I think from our initial attempts with 2019, we realized how much we didn't know. And so I wouldn't say we even got a good baseline at 2019. So there's no, I at least, maybe other people have thoughts about, you know, do we have any big wins? I would say not yet. Right now, I think we know that travel to and from conference is a huge proportion of emissions just based on prior literature. And I think Jason had some great insights into that. But in terms of, you know, energy usage of the conference itself, or, you know, food choices, like I said, I would say we had made some stumbling first attempts, but right now I don't even think we have a baseline.
I think from what we've seen is, I've seen Adrian in the chat, flights is the biggest CO2 contributor by quite a margin, and obviously that depends on where the conference is held, who is going to the conference, you know, and things. And the trade-off in the data we've been trying to gather is that we, as a community, we have a decision to make. Is attending the conference more important than the environmental impact of that conference? And the most sustainable thing to do is to not hold the conference at all. And then we remove any consumption. So really it's this question of this balance between what's it worth to the community, and how can we achieve similar outcomes with a much reduced carbon footprint. So to just throw a couple of ideas out there, SIGPlan has this excellent document on climate that I'll post in the chat. But ideas there include geo-distributed content, conferences, more hybrid conferences, virtual participation. The questions then go on, how do we make it engaging to be a virtual attendee? How do we make it so that you're not like a second-rate attendee at a hybrid conference? I think from what we've seen so far, it's mainly about this issue of travel.
Thank you. Yeah, and I believe Mina, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, no?
I'm sorry, I accidentally pushed the button. Sorry.
So fine. Yeah, and just as a reminder, when you begin to speak, just for those who may not be able to see the screen, just introduce yourself by name, give your pronouns again. Kelly, did you have your hand up at one point?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know where the button is to raise your hand. So
Okay,
I'm feeling like, how do I use technology?
It's under reactions, just for anyone else who needs that information. I also think it's not really so intuitive, but if you click on reactions, you'll see that it says raise hand.
Oh, I've just got clap and thumbs up and things. Anyway, I was just going to add to what Chris was saying in terms of that. I think we're in obviously it's been a horrific year for many, but we're in a good position in terms of what we've had to have these virtual conferences for the last year. And so we can really use this as a kind of an opportunity to kind of establish virtual participation moving forward, whether it's hybrid. or whatnot. And I think exactly what Andy did and has put in the chat is something that we've discussed, at least myself and Chris, is that we are experts in human-computer interaction. So surely we can figure out some way of making it really exciting for people to join virtually.
Absolutely, yeah. And Andy's comment in the chat was just that, aren't we interaction designers? Surely we are the people who should be leading the reimagining of conferences for a sustainable future. Nick had added in chat what temporal window is used. Surely extremely hard to know the range. For example, do downloads count? Will blockchain be used in the future? Oh, and I see Nick has their hand up.
Hiya, Kale. Hello everyone, Nick, currently in Namibia. I tend to ask the same sort of thing in all the equity talks, but I think, you know, not intending whatsoever to suggest that we shouldn't do anything because it's so hard, and highly enthusiastic about hybrid and distributed conferences, partly by virtue of my location. I think we also end up with a situation that we end up with some of the other equity topics, which is it's not just us. It's not just us going on this particular week and with all the ACs doing their stuff in prior weeks. It's also all of the nuts and bolts that create the create the contributions from both ourselves and our sponsors. And that, so for example, if we were to get a lot of sponsorship from a highly energy intensive using sponsor, which may allow us to have a much better hybrid conference, or something that was distributed across the year to manage the temporal aspects that we encounter during these 24/7 conferences. We might take that money to enable us to do something, but we might in this process be supporting an industry which where in our aspect of energy use or other resource use is minuscule compared to their industry. And so when I start thinking, and we've had this type of systemic or infrastructural or what was the word that Alex used, a structural issue discussed with equity and other aspects as well. And I just think it's worth always keeping it on the slate that none of this stuff can be done in isolation. And it's not just a matter of, you know, cutting down flights. It's actually changing the industry that we're part of and that we rely on for sponsorship and career destinations. Yeah, I'm sorry this always sounds a bit like frustrating when I say these things, but I think that's the reality.
It's frustrating stuff. You're echoing something actually in the Slido here, talking about how sustainability is so intimately linked to ACM's business model and what might threaten that. So do we know how the fully virtual CHI did this year? Also, just from messages here to me, I think there's an important reminder that we're sitting in front of these tiny little boxes with components that are extracted from the earth from all over. Huge environmental impact just being able to sit in front of this thing and have this chat. So it's not like being virtual excludes us actually from environmental impact in any way either. Adrian, you have your hand up?
Hi, yes. Oh,
oops.
Sorry, go ahead. I'll step back.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind. Sorry, I was struggling to find the hands up button. So I think there's a sort of, I really like that sort of almost divestment point we just had about, you know, who you take sponsorship from and the sort of broader ecosystem. And I totally agree with that. There's another way in which we can think about the scope of the changes we might bring about, right? One is you take it as read that the number of conferences and the way we do academic practice is not going to change. And those events are going to be constant. Then within each one, you try and reduce the footprint of each one. And that's sort of like an efficiency argument. I'm going to take the thing I'm currently doing and I'm going to try and shave it off a bit, right? If you want to have a large effect, then what you need to do is think about, you know, academic practice and how many conferences are reasonable, right? If you're going to 20 a year, you can reduce your diet of flights by going to 1 a year. And if there are, you know, many less events, or you're publishing in a different way, and you're thinking about, you know, who's Chi for, right? It's 50% new people every year. It's how early career researchers build their career. So maybe the early career researchers get to go, and some of the, you know, greybeards like myself get to stay at home and participate virtually. And, you know, can you think about how to do the jobs that the conference does in a different way? So I just think there's some really interesting sort of scoping questions about when you try and make, you know, working from within one conference is a very limited starting point. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I feel like you're almost even calling us back to some of the questions we've had around regionalism and chapters and supporting smaller conferences, localized conferences, greater, you know, focus and attention to that. But Christopher, you had your hand up.
Hi, Chris, he, him again. I think a really going further with Adrian's point is in SIGCHI, we inherently have our networking events linked to our publication outputs. So in order to publish, the main publishing venues are conferences. And there is, I remember when I first started, I was quite surprised that you had to attend the conference for your paper to be published, which seemed a little bit bizarre because in my mind at the time, it was two separate things. One is publishing this state-of-the-art research and one is attending the conference, presenting and networking. So I think we're also seeing the shift to these hybrid models of publication, like IMWORT, ISS, where there's a journal element and then there's a conference element as well. And I think sometimes perhaps we might need to take a look at, do we need to separate and have very explicit, you know, networking events that are there to support early career researchers and to network, and then should the publications be separated from that? Because I think at the minute they're very intertwined.
Thanks, Chris. We'll turn it over to Alina, and then I believe Bridget had her hand up after that.
Yes, hello, Elina Eriksson, she, her from KTH in Stockholm, Sweden. We have a research project that is looking at the carbon emissions from our own university. And of course, everybody's thrilled about that. We've been trying to meet with people to discuss with them how we're going to reach our own university's climate targets, which is to cut our emission by 60% in the coming 10 years. And nobody wants to meet and workshop with us at our own university, so it's a bit sensitive. But I would like to I think the previous two ideas of looking into regional conferences and maybe making these kind of networks, like splitting it so that you have publishing in one way and networking in another way, is really important. And I support that early career researchers should have the possibility to build a network. But that is not what we're seeing when we're looking at the data at our university. And it might be that KTH is different from other universities, but I don't think it is. So the ones that fly are more senior researchers. And it's, if you look at the distribution on flying at the university, it's an extreme or unfair distribution, basically. So there's a few who fly tremendous amounts, like you can't really understand why they fly so much. And then there are a vast majority who doesn't fly or fly very little. So obviously, and there is research from Canada, for example, that shows that it's not connected to being a brilliant researcher, basically, regarding age index, etc. So this it's more correlated with salary. I mean, that's interesting. And so I really endorse, and I think it's a good idea to look into smaller conferences, more networking that are like really good, basically, rather than having humongous conferences where you miss everyone all the time. Thank you.
That's a really, really good point. It also, like, yeah, again, brings us back to inequities around, you know, status in universities, students versus professors. Some of our, past equity talks. But Bridget, did you have a comment?
There's lots of very interesting points being made, and I was just reflecting there about, you know, over the last 2 years, so I've met with Chris and Kristen very regularly, and we discuss things and tour things up and around. But one of the points, you know, we all agreed that we want to try and measure things, and it's so difficult to measure. But one of we don't have all the answers, but Kristen, maybe you'd like to come in here, but Kristen made very good points about it's very hard to measure the spark you get, you know, that maybe you get some idea on a corridor, or you bump into someone while you're at your coffee and you get an idea for the next big project. And how do we, you know, what Chris was saying, okay, if we stopped all activity, we'd lower our impact, our emissions impact, but we must take account of the contribution. And is there a way we could kind of measure the innovation and the potential for us to contribute in a positive way to the climate through our innovation? And I'd be interested in thoughts people might have on that too. But I agree, Elena, you raised an interesting point about, you know, do we have kind of hybrid conferences, might be geo dispersed, you know, a group of people in Stockholm or Melbourne and connecting with others in San Francisco or Tokyo, you know, and having a kind of a virtual, some sort of a combination. Anyway, I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thanks so much, Bridget. To get us up in chat here, Neha added, to your point, Chris, Julie Williamson had written up a post about publication fee and registration fee. I would have to find it, but that might be a step towards separating attendance from publishing. Link was posted. Adrian had said in chat, this doesn't surprise me. Intuitively, I think this is linked to status and connections and the love of travel. Some have even told me that's the perk of the job, and Matthews agreed with that. In Slido, the next most upvoted question is, should there be an adjunct chair for sustainability on the SIGCHI EC? I personally don't see why we would need anyone on sustainability on the EC. I'm kidding. Of course, I think that's absolutely necessary. And Michael Mueller has added in chat, my experience of CHI 21 was that it was more like a trade show in which the speakers are a special class of participants and the remainder of us were merely audience. By contrast, IUI 21 was a much smaller conference, but it was also much more egalitarian. There were speakers, but the audience was much more present, and the discussion after presentation was much more of a conversation and less the CHI 21 model of a hyper-controlled Q&A session. And Neha, I'll turn it over to you next.
First, +1 to what Michael said, and I think some of the smaller conferences have really been quite amazing experiences. I thought CHI Play was amazing, and CSCW was also pretty good. The reason I raised my hand was actually to to comment on the point about the AC for sustainability. I was curious if we could maybe reframe the question to what are the types of things that an AC for sustainability could be and should be looking at. Are there thoughts here? Is it more of a kind of a planning role for conferences? Is it about really scoping out just sustainability issues much more broadly, maybe putting together a task force for doing that? So what are the types of things that you have in mind? And feel free to just put your thoughts into the chat as well for this.
Yeah, that's perfect. Kristen, I believe you had your hand up.
Sorry, my raised hand icon disappeared. I don't know how. Yeah, I guess I wanted to go off a little bit what Michael and Bridget were saying, but I'll come back to what Neha just raised so that I don't completely take us off the rails. But one thing that has struck me looking at these past couple of conferences and the data we've collected around travel to the conference is how there can be very real trade-offs socially when you start trying to minimize the travel footprint. Because mixing with people from other cultures and countries can have very real impact about how you think about these things, about your research, but also about the scientific community or what you even think a good research question is for the community or for the globe. I mean, I will say, having worked with other sustainability co-chairs, I've been the only American talking with my European colleagues who find it much more easier to prioritize sustainability questions because of the funding goals that happen through the EU that prioritize sustainability research in a way that we're not quite seeing in the HCI side of things here in the US. I mean, I think it gets prioritized in things like energy, but we're not an energy research department. And so I think there's a lot of value to mixing with other cultures. And I also think, somebody mentioned this earlier, that when we think about minimizing the footprint, we also could be taking advantage of the fact that we've all gotten to go to these conferences for decades. And there are many emerging communities around the world who may not have had the opportunity. So now pushing a hybrid or globally distributed model, we might actually be cutting off access to global networks to those communities prematurely. And so I think there's some real trade-offs between the social impact on our research versus the environmental impact our community has that we have to think rather carefully about. So going to what an AC could potentially do, I think by elevating the sustainability role to the Executive Council, there's an opportunity to have real dialogues about what those trade-offs look like with other people who are tasked with equity questions in a different domain. And having that at that higher level can allow for really laying out a strategic plan about how we can both be conscious of our environmental impact, but not foreclose the social benefits that networking at a conference has.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in chat agreeing with you, Kristen. And yeah, I actually know myself of a number of communities who are alienated from larger conferences because they refuse to fly or because of environmental relationships, things like that. So Cash, you have a hand up here.
Yeah, Cash, he, him. Yeah, I'd like to follow up on what Christine mentioned about the value of in-person conferences. And I think kind of believe that we are kind of jumping the gun to switching to fully virtual or hybrid. And I was wondering whether we can take these initial steps to reduce our impact instead of totally going one step ahead and switching the format altogether. I've mentioned this in the Kai Town Hall before, but one of my favorite music festivals, which is also an international event typically, with thousands or tens of thousands of visitors, they have a sustainability policy every year on their website. Let me try to pull that up. I don't know if you can see my screen, but I've shared it on my screen itself and on the link. And basically they have a set of bullet points that say they aim to be 100% carbon free. And also they plan their diets and things they use in the not conference, but festival accordingly. So if we can also, again, like Christine mentioned, have an AC, and then along with that also a policy or a statement that says something like, okay, these are the things we will guarantee at our conferences. That could already make quite a big impact, in my opinion.
Thanks, Cash. Yeah, that's quite helpful. Adrian has added in chat. So I think this is partly about time and frequency of these engagements. If you travel less frequently, but for longer, and take in some research visits and deeply engage, as you suggest, that's one thing. But that's not the same as going to all the conferences. So we'll turn it over to Bridget and then Christopher.
It was just following up on that last point made. Bridget Kane, she, her, from Karlstad in Sweden. There's an organization that I notice is little known in the US. I think it's mostly European and other parts of the world, called Green Key. And for that, like, our university has signed up to it. So when we were organizing conferences, we agreed to abide by this standard. And it's like sourcing local products, being as sustainable as humanly possible, really, for the conference. And I think it's, it'd be great if this could spread and become more, I suppose people were more aware of it, or organizers particularly become more aware of it, that these options are there. It can make the conference perhaps a little bit more expensive, but we organised something in the last couple of years at Karlstad, and overall it matched really what would have been elsewhere. So Green Key, I'll type the link in the chat.
Hi, Chris, he, him. So just to pick up on Kristen's point, it's a really excellent point, because it highlights this trade-off that we have when we consider sustainability in terms of social connections. But there's also, in terms of moving forward to perhaps hybrid or geo-distributed, there's also implications for accessibility and inclusivity. So with our data that we've collected, the low cost, the ease of access to virtual conferences was quite a significant reason some people attended for WIST and CSCW. People have caregiving responsibilities, they can't take off the time to travel, they can't afford to travel. So I think that's really important to consider when we think of these kind of bigger shifts in terms of how we run our conferences and publications. And I think this leads into the role of, within the EC, if there is a sustainability chair, that someone needs to consider this position and kind of fight for the sustainability cause at a higher level, because there are all these different trade-offs that are coming in from different angles. And at the minute, what we find is that, so, I'm the sustainability chair for WIST, the co-chair for WIST. There's conferences that don't have sustainability chairs. There's conferences that 1 year they'll have a chair, 1 year they won't have a chair. So really, this should be at a SIGCHI level. This is at a community level, rather than having kind of a siloed conferences fighting for individual conferences.
I think that's a really great point, Chris, and a lot of people in the chat seem to agree with you. Yeah, it's these issues of sustainability are inseparable from accessibility, maternity, people being able to attend a conference or not in these ways. Just before I turn it over to Neha, who has a comment, Michael had added in chat, this is just a personal situation, although I know of at least one European scholar who's in the same situation. My arthritis medicine suppresses my immune system. Although I've been fully vaccinated, I may not be able to fly safely for several more years. Similarly, I may not be able to sit safely in close-packed chairs in a conference room. Thus, I remain very interested in virtual or hybrid formats. Nick asked, are there any models to show the relative impact of changing an industry, for example, IT in general versus individual community responsibility? was thinking if we aren't influencing the big consumers, maybe our smaller efforts aren't really effective. Elena added, I think hybrid or virtual formats could also be inclusive to people who do not have the funds to travel. And Neha.
Yeah, so my comment was going to be in response to Adrian's point here. So Adrian wrote, even venue choice is done too far in advance for a given year sustainability chairs. The continuity is missing. And I think that is a very real concern because often sustainability chairs are determined after the site has been selected and the team is being put together for that particular site. So that is something I think to keep in mind for the future.
Elena? Oh, you're on mute.
Now I can start talking. Elena, she, her from Stockholm, Sweden. I think that we're living in a pivotal time, and I'm not sure. So of course, then being stuck here in Sweden for more than a year, I don't know how it is in other countries, but I see this tremendous shift in how industry is responding to climate change, at least in Sweden. So this is perhaps a comment to Nick's comment in the chat, whether or not it should be individual, community, or industry. I think that it's coming, and it's coming because we can't not see it anymore. So recently, the International Energy, I don't know if it's called agency, they had a report that stated that from this year there shouldn't be any more investments in oil fields or coal mines. That's coming from them is pretty aggressive because they have been very vague earlier on. In Sweden today, I got a message on my phone that they decided that from 2040 it should be forbidden to sell diesel or gasoline, and that's in a fairly short period of time. And I'm thinking about how are we going to handle agriculture and stuff when we can't use diesel or gasoline. So I'm thinking that there's a huge shift coming, and when it comes to flying, it's really hard to find the alternatives that are based on renewable energy or electricity. So I think it's coming, and then it's better to, like, if we start and show that it's possible, I think the industry can learn, like the larger part of the IT industry can learn from whatever we're doing to make it fulfilling and meaningful, and having these kind of deep meetings, even if it's through a virtual means.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of people seem to agree with Jen's comment in the chat that, responding to Neha, Adrian, for both sustainability and accessibility chairs, being in the room during budget meetings and site selection meetings is so essential. It may be time to start clearly defining what roles need to be decided early when. And I think that's an excellent point. I mean, COVID may have brought a lot of accessibility issues and concerns to the forefront of more people's minds, but these are so entwined. Sorry, I just see that Kristen, you have your hand up, and then we can turn things over to Nick if you'd still like to offer something.
Yeah, I'm kind of echoing a little bit what Adrian said in the chat, which is talking about at which point site selection happens in the process. So we, as sustainability co-chairs, have been trying to find out the minute we get on the organizing committee, like, who is your chair, not for this conference, but for next conference or 2 years down the road. And what we're finding is, even if we have the best will of the community, no one knows. Sometimes the site is given to the chair. Sometimes the chair isn't even part of that site selection. I think Jen mentioned in the chat that the executive committee oftentimes has a role in the site selection, but that tends to happen for CHI a lot more than maybe for the smaller conferences. And I would say that even at the smaller conferences, we have not been very successful, just because there's so much uncertainty that happens around site selection, and there's a lot of agility needed because of the negotiation process of setting the contract, that it has been really difficult for the sustainability chair to make an impact. The second thing I would say, which echoes a little bit of what Jen's saying in the chat too, is just talking about budget. Right now, as I understand it, sustainability doesn't really have a budget at all. And so a lot of what we've been doing is going around trying to save our conferences money, as far as like, oh, if you walk, except for as needed for accessibility, rather than drive everybody to the party, then you don't have to pay for transportation. So those are the kinds of pitches we've been making, often because there's no budget. And I think that in some ways that can be a loss, because we can use budgetary money to incentivize sustainable purchasing decisions with our co-organizers, such as, you know, when SVs get t-shirts, we as sustainability chairs can say, oh, well, you could use recyclable t-shirts that have low impact dyes. And sometimes those actually cost a little bit more. But if sustainability had a budget, they could sort of incentivize better purchasing decisions.
Nick, would you like to go next?
Yeah, and so all of those things, and I particularly like, you know, the discussions that are about how accessibility and inclusivity are always entwined with the sustainability. But I know that we've sort of mentioned already about, you know, components and the minerals and so on. But I just felt kind of uncomfortable only talking about the things that are directly around the conference, because I think there is I know that people are not thinking in this isolated way, but I think that it cannot just be about changing our own behavior. Like, students go to conferences partly to meet employers for postdocs and so on, many of whom are amongst the most resource hungry industries in the world, if not the most resource hungry, as far as that chip industry paper from Bloomberg is on. And I sort of feel like, yes, it's really important for us to all engage with hybrid conferences and more sustainable things, but we can't not talk about the elephant in the room, because the career destinations, the money, the collaborations and partnerships, the papers that we accept from our industry partners, those things are gigantic compared to what the conference itself uses. So I sort of feel like that this has to be, we have to keep it on the table all the time. And I think Adrian was saying some things earlier on, but I just feel that we often shift off from that. So, and because this is more like an activist role, one of the things that I would think from a sustainability chair is you do need somebody who is, or maybe a team, people who actually can sort of look the elephant in the eye. They shouldn't be an elephant, they're delightful. Look the guzzler in the eye and say, look, if you want to come to our conference, what are you going to do about X, Y, Z? And not necessarily have it solved in a year, but have that conversation, make it part and parcel of the sustainability mission. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people are agreeing with you, Nick. To catch everyone up on what's happening in chat, Adrian had added, this is a great point, Adelina, we don't have the land for biofuels to fly at the scale we do now. Neha added, and also to those who might have to wait longer to get vaccinated, thinking of the in-person conferences that are planned for January-ish timeframe. Adrian added, even the venue choice is done too far in advance for a given year's sustainability chairs. The continuity is missing. Kelly wrote, what are the next steps for ensuring a sustainability chair on the SIGCHI EC? Adrian said, I like and agree with the point that equity and accessibility are intertwined with sustainability. and added, yes, these are negotiated for CHI years in advance. One aspect is the rotation around the world, but also venue size. Agree with this point that so often sustainability also has to be the cheaper option, back to the financial model, I'm afraid. And Neha said, to Kristen's point, the VP conferences and AC for sustainability could be meeting with the various conference steering committees to communicate these priorities and commitments before key decisions are made, all of which are great points. We have about 10 minutes of recorded time left, and we'll transition to unrecorded time after that. But if anyone would like to add anything. Louis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Hi everyone. Yeah, Luis Castro from the Sonora Institute of Technology in Mexico. Him. Just following up on Nick's comments on the visibility, perhaps, of our employers or the people we collaborate with. I think, and maybe just an idea, just a thought that we could make more visible in our papers some sort of declaration of impact for if it is known, I mean, the type of carbon footprint that our employer or company is contributing to annually, and just to make it more visible, just some sort of a declaration of impact or environmental impact or carbon footprint. And I think that would raise awareness among the community. I mean, who are the companies who are contributing, or employers who are contributing more, and just to make it visible. Just a thought.
No, I think that's a fantastic suggestion. Kelly, I see that you have your hand up, and then Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I like that point. I think we've discussed that a few times about kind of getting people to reflect on the environmental footprint that they have when publishing a paper, etc. I think what's kind of important to note with this type of thing is that different industries, well, different companies, they apply different scopes in terms of what they calculate their carbon emissions, and so it can be really difficult to then say, oh, this paper or this company provided X amount of carbon, because everyone does different kind of methods about what carbon accounting, how carbon accounting is done, basically. So I think one of the issues moving forward in terms of thinking about that with our research is to really set out a set of policies or standards around what methods and approaches and data that we use in order to do these calculations. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you, Kelly. Chris, and then if there's anyone that hasn't had an opportunity to speak, I'd encourage you to do so. And then Kristen after that.
Hi, Chris, he, him from Bath. So I think Nick and Lewis make some great points around having kind of champions in the conference roles, which is what really at the minute the sustainability roles are. The issue we have is we have to then put pressure on people in other roles, whether it's sponsorship chairs, whether it's the general chairs, and so much of our role depends on buy-in from other people. We can only do as much as others will let us. So really, in terms of having someone at the EC level, in terms of writing sustainability principles into processes, into procedures, and this same thing, you could replace the word sustainability with accessibility. Ideally, everyone, and inclusivity, everyone should be aware of these. Everyone in the community should be pulling in the same direction. And, we often joke sometimes that our role as sustainability chairs is to make ourselves redundant. This is not everyone agrees with that, but it's the same principle. If everyone is aware and makes everything accessible, if everyone is aware and makes things sustainable, and I think the route towards that is to come a much higher level down and incorporate these into policies and procedures, so that it's not up to a general chair, it's not up to a sponsorship chair to have the choice whether they want to incorporate sustainability or accessibility.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Jen, I see that you have your hand up, and then Kristen.
Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay, this is Jen. I just wanted to ask, and I'm sorry for missing the first half hour, but are we considering setting up concrete goals for reductions, like a goal of a 50% or 90% reduction in emissions across our conferences? Have we thought about setting up a committee to assess that? Have we considered giving conferences a sustainability, like a emissions budget that they have to balance in order to get their budgets approved for conferences, or that they can trade with other conferences if they want to have a year that is, more significant, and other conferences are willing to do less, the way that carbon trading can happen? What kinds of concrete goals and tactics are we considering applying, or could we?
I think that's a fantastic point. Yeah. Kristen, would you like to maybe respond to that as well as offer what you were going to say?
Oh man, can I put my hand down? No, I mean, I guess I would say a couple things to Jen's question. One is, yes, we have considered concrete goals, and that's where we have tried to collect data to get a baseline to understand what is the environmental impact of just holding a conference, so that we could set concrete goals that are achievable and not just idealistic. The second part about, do we have a committee that's actually looking at this? We have tried to maintain some continuity from year to year by just forming really a collective of like-minded individuals who are interested in the sustainability of conferences. One of the things we've been able to benefit from is that both WIST and CSCW have signed on to having each co-chair come in for 2 years. And so for every year you get a new co-chair and you have your previous co-chair from the previous year. And so there's been, we've been able to maintain some continuity and passing down of prior experience through that model. The last point about, have we considered a carbon budget? So questions of measuring carbon emissions from travel to the conference have been elevated, at least at ACM, and they've set some policies about carbon offsetting for conferences. It is up to the conference to decide whether they will take advantage of that carbon offsetting choice for their conference. But there is some policies in place right now that allow us to do that. And one of the issues we've run into in our own implementation of the carbon option or carbon offsetting option is that we've used a opt-in model. And this is largely because some people cannot charge their grants or funding options with the charge of carbon offsetting. So this can complicate the ability for people to be able to opt in. And so there's a couple of things there. As an opt-in option, we found very low participation, which has been rather disappointing. So it'd be nice to see SIGCHI elect to just offset the carbon by default out of the budget. Not being privy to how much the conferences have made each year, I don't know how feasible that is, but I think it's something that we could achieve in the near term if we wanted to take this seriously. Departing from Jen's questions, one of the things I wanted to respond to was this question about the business model of the conference itself. And one thing we have done as chairs is we've tried to eliminate swag so that we're not having wasted items be transported to the conference and then distributed out where people either throw them away or there's just this large surplus that has to be dealt with after the conference. And in doing that, we had the opportunity to start talking to funders about how they bring swag to the conference or ways in which they might choose more sustainable well, how they might make themselves visible in a more sustainable way, such as sponsoring experiences as opposed to giving out branded water bottles. I think we have to be really careful when we start talking to our funders and create an allyship model, like we're in this together. Our sponsors want to help us make our conferences sustainable, as opposed to villainizing them from the outset. And I think it's really important that we take this attitude because some of our funders are in much better positions than we are in terms of institutionalizing sustainability into their own organization. So when we brought on co-chairs for sustainability at WIS 2019, we had the opportunity to talk to Microsoft, who has a sustainability officer as part of their organization. And we could go and just pick their brain about, okay, we want to make our conference more sustainable. You know, what has Microsoft been doing to make its operations more sustainable? Are there lessons we can learn from them and that we can migrate over? So I think we want to be careful in terms of when we start talking about whose money we're taking, that we're also making sure that we're embarking on a joint project and not necessarily alienating some of the people who could be our allies.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Kristen. That's a lot of very useful information. I just want to jump in really quickly to say that our lovely captioner and interpreter will need to step off very, very shortly. Since there are no accessibility requests for this meeting, we'll continue with automated captions and no sign language interpreting for the optional unrecorded 30-minute discussion that's about to begin. I'd like to thank our organizers and aides while we're still on recording. So that would be Neha, Shawen, Adriana, Vinova, Stacy, Soraya, Teresa, Elena, Miriam, Christopher, Kelly, Bridget, Kristen, Matthew, Jason, Shonda, and Susie. You're all fantastic. And to just catch things up on record with the comments, Andy added, if we're still concerned with the sustainability role on the EC, I wanted to ask what other events are we organizing online/hybrid to enable early career researchers to develop their networks and socialize without flying? Elena said, 1+ Nick. One reason why I haven't been attending CHI for a while is the carbon emission from flying, and partly because I feel uncomfortable of the overarching vibe of more is better, not least through all the industrial perspectives. Neha added, at Kelly, if the EC decides that sustainability is a priority, there would be few to no barriers to creating an AC role. If that has not yet decided, thus this Equity Talk blog summary should help. Judy added, the online experience is impacted by the fact that researchers are often still keeping up with their other duties. Would it make more sense to adjust the program? For example, all panelists on one day so that it's easier to dedicate the time to stay engaged. Pranjal added, apart from the SIGCHI sponsored conferences, we could also think about how in cooperation with conferences, think of sustainability. Neha said, for your information, we did try to make carbon offsets a priority in the Gary Marston Travel Awards, but we'll have to wait until the physical travel resumes. And finally, Adrian added, I like Jen's points. Without a ceiling and some downward pressure, we won't see change. There are some fundamental questions here. You can have the conference's impact-ish by running it every other year or sponsoring half as many conferences. Splitting this down at a per conference level may lead to inequities if not considered carefully. And with that, I will hand things over to Neha if there's anything to close us out on the recorded portion.
I think that's about it. Thank you, everybody. So don't leave yet, because we are going to go into the unrecorded portion of the chat, but I don't think there's anything else in particular that we need to have recorded. Just that we will have a blog post up eventually, and it will try to capture all of what we've discussed in the chat as well as in the verbal exchanges. So thank you all for coming, and please do stay for the next half hour. And I'm going to stop the recording now.